got the talking spoon?
I have the talking spoon. That is right. So today I'm going to give you guys kind of a demonstration on how to use some of the natural dyes and give you guys an explanation on how I did it, and to kind of show you that orange, while it may not be in the sense that we see it as like a neon orange or things today, it is achievable, and it is, you know, a period color, and it is something you can use and dye with. But I am going to start with the yellow because it was the first one to fit, so I'm going to start with saffron. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys the importance of scoring your fabric beforehand. And I'm going to bring a couple little pieces like this. Show you guys. So, in the medieval era, soda ash was used to score fabric, and it's kind of like a bleaching. You won't want to touch this one just because it will irritate your hands and they will itch. But it has been used as dyeing. It's kind of a bleaching process.
Okay.
Without doing this on specifically cellulose fibers, this is not for wool. Wool is a completely different process. So everything I'm saying is only applicable to linen today. But once you score it with the soda ash, it will adhere with fabric to the dye better.
Why don't you tell us, what is scoring with soda ash?
It's basically where you're cleaning the fabric. Scoring is basically where you're cleaning it and removing any excess dirt, chemicals, anything like that. There's a couple different ways you can do it, but I will show you the difference, and we'll pass these around. This is what happens when you don't score the linen. Certain things will not adhere to the fabric. Things like turmeric will, and that's just because it's a very potent dye, but it fades very quickly.
I'll have to do it later.
And I'll start with this one and kind of pass that around. So that is kind of what happens when you don't score your linens. It makes it not take any dyes very well. There are certain dyes that require mordants. Turmeric is not one of them, but I'm not really going to use turmeric today. We're going to be dealing with just saffron and yellow onion skins. So once you're done scoring, and here's, I'll bring this around to kind of show you guys why it's important, so you all can see. Even though it's new fabric that has never been touched, that is what the water looks like after just a few minutes of it sitting in there. That is just all dirt, grime, and chemicals.
So how much do you put in with the water to score it?
So what I use, because it's the easiest to just find, and it is pure soda ash, I use nifty little tie-dye enhancer right here. And it comes pre-packaged in little pouches, and it's a gallon per this pouch. You can get about 6 articles of clothing with this, dependent on the size of your garment, obviously. A giant dress would probably require quite a bit of this, but this is a very crucial step, especially when it comes to using yellow onion skins. It, as you can see, does not work unless you do. So once you do that, I'm just going to kind of take my first little swatch and put this guy in here.
Sure, that's white lining.
And you don't want the water boiling. There are certain ones that if the water boils, it will change the color of it. You don't want it boil. You want it in like a pre-boil stage. I have found that letting it sit for at least 30 minutes, it has to be at least 30 minutes. I recommend an hour, but at minimum 30 minutes to just kind of sit in the bath while it's hot. And I have found that turning it off and letting it continue to sit for a little while kind of cools down, kind of helps adhere to the fabric. That's just my own personal recommendation. So when dyeing with saffron, there's a couple different ones here that I did. So this right here is both saffron and turmeric. Creates a very beautiful golden color. It does require a mordant because of the saffron. If you were to do turmeric, like I said, you wouldn't need that. Mordants are things such as alum, cream of tartar, which actually is period. It is the byproduct of winemaking. And you know, while soda ash wasn't necessarily in mass production, you know, some of these things may not have been in mass production. Doesn't mean it wasn't used. Here is, you know, as you can see in my lien here, this is just plain with just saffron. So different colors, you add different things to the dye vats. It'll change kind of how the colors work together and how they go. The reason that that won't fade as much is because there is saffron in it. And that is part of the reason that they use saffron and turmeric together, is because it helps the turmeric stay. It doesn't fade as badly. I used paprika just as a experiment to see what would happen if I dyed with it. And without using a mordant, the entire dye was gone from the fabric just within 2 days from sitting in the sun. I just sat it in my window, completely back to the regular color in which it was originally, with just a slight yellow tinge. Wasn't worth bringing, it was a little tiny strip, but that is one of the ways in which you can kind of see how a mordant is actually very important in the dye process. So I just kind of, everyone says you should regularly stir it. I kind of find it just stir it a little bit. I don't really like to disturb the dye all that much. Just kind of vaguely stir. And I have found in my research that saffron actually has antimicrobial, antifungal properties to it. And in my research, that is actually partially, in my opinion, why I think the Buddhist monks in particular would use saffron to dye things, because they would take things such as pure cloth, as what the Buddha would say. And pure cloth is cloth that is discarded. So it could be anything from birthing rags to wrappings that they would wrap the dead in, to menstrual cloth. I mean, anything that was discarded fabric was viewed as pure fabric. So the Buddhists would take that and dye them with things such as paprika, saffron, turmeric, and it varied on region. So the colors of the Buddhist monks' robes could vary from yellow to orange to maroon, dependent on what was locally available to them. So that is why when you see the Tibetan monks versus the Shaolin monks, their robes are sometimes can be quite different. Does anyone have any questions or anything? Questions, comments, concerns? No? Okay. What I used as my mordant in saffron in particular, I found that alum was not enough necessarily. It wouldn't produce the vibrant yellow that I wanted, so I just took a little bit of apple cider vinegar and put it in. Yes?
Side topic, where are the dogs?
In the car.
Okay, because Trouble is cruising the tents.
Oh, no, they're in the car.
I don't know, okay. I just wasn't sure if that would be a problem.
It shouldn't be. If they're in the car, it shouldn't be an issue, as long as she doesn't jump up in there.
Okay. Carry on.
Trouble is that she...
Yep.
Okay. But I found apple cider vinegar worked the best, and while there's varying forms of vinegar that was used in the medieval ages, the Irish would particularly use various fruits and ferment them into vinegar. And so that's why I chose apple cider vinegar, because it is a fruit vinegar and it would mimic what they would use. I unfortunately do not have two things that I found to be kind of important. One is a copper pot. Those are very expensive. So I'm working on lining one of my pots. But what I did do when making the dye vats is I took a large copper wire and put it in the vat to just kind of sit with it while it absorbed all the colors, and it did help. I think it would be better if I had a copper pot, but I don't necessarily have that. The other thing is, one of the best mordants in the medieval period was fermented urine. I do not have a place to do that because it smells and it takes quite a bit of to do this. So I plan to kind of make a spot to possibly have that eventually, but that's why I chose vinegar instead. Yes.
Cabela's?
Cabela's? It actually, so the best fermented urine that you can use is the urine of a man who has had multiple strong drinks. So a drunk man would need to pee in a cup for me to ferment in order to do that.
So alcoholic urine.
Yes. Well, Owen, when I get my fermentation spot set up, I'll ask you.
Send it in.
But that is traditionally how they would do it. Is the drunk guys would go pee in whatever, and they would ferment that. So I don't have access to that at the moment. So I am using other things, and I honestly think that if I did use fermented urine, it would dye things and it would change the colors of things a little bit, but access to that, so I'm using vinegar and alum as mine. I found that they were the easiest to work with and produced the results I wanted. One of the things about dyeing with saffron as well, and any yellow, because there are multiple things that will give you similar colors to yellow, such as peat moss. It gives you a very similar saffron-y looking yellow, but it's not quite the same. It is a more bright yellow instead of a golden yellow, in my opinion. But it kind of depends. If you put iron with it, it will turn it green, a very beautiful green. So you kind of have to be careful when you're doing your mordants and things, because if you try to mix the dyes or do things differently and using different mordants, your color will completely change. It's definitely chemistry. So to start, I always recommend soaking, especially in the soda ash and the alum, for at least 20 to 30 minutes. It just kind of gets everything going, kind of helps it. I read somewhere that people cold soak it, and I didn't think that worked as well. I found that to just kind of, it would work, but not as well as I was wanting. So I found that doing it that way and then kind of letting it sit for a minute really helps. And especially if you leave the fabric damp, it will adhere better. Dry fabric, when you put it in there, it kind of shocks the fabric and it's not quite ready for that. So I have found it adheres better, especially when the fabric is already a little pre-wet. Let me see if this guy...
Kaylee and I originally thought it would be as simple as let's grab some turmeric and turn things yellow and then find something that's just slightly red and just put a few drops of red in and call it good.
That only works if you're eating.
Yeah, we quickly learned it's not that simple.
Well, and certain things, like I learned, for example, madder. If you heat the bath too hot with madder root, it will actually turn orange when you're done dyeing. So even temperature is very important. Like I said, I accidentally got this dress to a boil because I quit paying attention for 5 seconds to run to the bathroom, and it started boiling. So that also, I think, did kind of change what was going on in the top dress as well, because, but I will also say with saffron, the more the better. I'm only using about almost 3 grams in this vat. I would recommend more for a brighter color. I did not put turmeric in this just because I wanted to show you guys dyeing with just saffron, but adding turmeric to it will definitely give it that really, really gorgeous golden color here. So just kind of depends on the color that you want. And I've also learned the longer you soak it, the more it saturates. So if you want a certain color, I probably should have left this one in longer, but I was last minute finishing it, so I didn't quite get it into the third dye bath. But when I get to the onions, I'll actually explain how that can even using slightly different onion skins will completely change the dyes. And what I'm going to do really quick. So I'm going to take this guy off here for a minute and trade. And I'm just going to let that soak in there for a little bit. You don't want to take it out right away. Okay. Well, that kind of starts. Okay. So then I will show you guys this portion. So, these are both dyed with the same-ish vat. I had to use the same vat, but when you're dyeing things, water evaporates. What happens when you put water in the dye vat? It kind of dilutes it. So I had to get more onion skins, and I learned a lesson. You want the onions with the most of that orange skin on the outside and the thick skin. You do not want very thin, the very thin papery skins. If you do that, you will end up with this top color here. It will not turn out as orange and as vibrant as it did here. I also used a pre-soak of alum on this one as well as some apple cider vinegar, just to kind of help brighten it, because it was a little yellow when the first time I did it. Added 3 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, and it brightened up. So I think the vinegar works really well if you don't have urine. I think that it's a good substitute. But it can also, you can see how the difference is just in using a slightly thinner onion skin will completely change the dye. I know with saffron, if you use less potent skin or less potent stamens, it doesn't do as well either. So you want the stamens that are fully red. You want as much saffron as you possibly can in order for it to work. The cheaper one, not cheaper, but what you would consider the cheaper saffron won't get as much of a dye to it. So it's one of those times expensive is probably better on this one. But definitely if you're wanting to dye with onion skins, the thicker the skin, the better. If it has those papery skins, it's going to kind of end up in a yellowish golden color more than if you do it with the thicker ones. And this is only with two dye baths. I've only put it in twice. Everything I have was dipped twice. I wouldn't let it dry fully until the end. And then kind of in using some of my own tie-dye experience from being small and doing tie-dye, I found that you let the fabric fully dry. It kind of gives it that extra time to kind of adhere, and it sticks better. Less comes out when you rinse it. That is another thing that I noticed when I did. Where did it go? I don't know where the other ones went. Oh, those ones, yes. Thank you. I rinsed these ones immediately after, and I found that it just didn't, it was a little bit brighter, but rinsing it really took a lot of that away. So I personally recommend letting the fabric dry and then giving it a good rinse. I have not rinsed the dress. I finished it, so I still have to kind of rinse this. But it's my second layer, so it doesn't matter as much. But that is very important, and like I said, this in particular, scoring the fabric for yellow onions, absolutely essential. If you don't do it, you will end up with this, and you will sit in your kitchen crying like I did, wondering what you did wrong. So... But
so, have you guys ever heard of the phrase "a pot to so broke you don't have a pot to piss in"? So in medieval times, often those who were poor would pee in a pot, especially overnight, and sell the urine to those who were dyeing clothing or dyeing or using the urine for leatherworks and tanners, and they would use that urine then so they would pay them for the urine. So if you were too broke or so poor you don't have a pot to piss in, it means you don't even have a pot literally to piss in at night, and you have to go out and basically pee in the street. So yes, or the alley. Because that was, rather than begging for money, that was another way to earn money.
Mm-hmm. And predominantly, especially in Ireland, now obviously there's other cases, but predominantly in Ireland, women were the one that did all the dyeing. So, you go sell your pee to the local, dyeing lady. But does anyone have any questions or anything?
I do.
What?
So the SCA states that orange was not a color, that it's period, and...
It's not just the SCA, it's a lot of people. It's not just one, there's a lot of people who do a lot of medieval reenactment. Mm-hmm. Even historians who say orange isn't a period color because, well, it wasn't linguistically created until 1502. But that does not mean that the color did not exist. That just means the word for the color did not exist until 1502.
Could have been a different word.
Yes, exactly. Like blue. Blue actually did not have it had multiple names technically, but it was technically indigo. There was blue wen, I think is how you say it, or something like that.
Cerulean?
Yep, there was a lot of different names for blue. So to say that, there's just not a word for it. Well, I would classify in medieval times, if I was doing dyeing and things like that, I would classify this probably as yellow, because it is more on the yellow spectrum. It definitely has an orange tinge to it. It's definitely more of a bronzy color or even a golden color, which gives it that orange feel to it. But I definitely would say that, those orange was probably classified as brown, red, and yellow in the medieval period. because if you get orange really dark, I don't know if you've ever looked at a color wheel or like when you're doing on like computer editing and stuff, and you darken a bright orange, it turns brown. So I'm assuming, you know, just because we didn't have a word for it, if you were to see something like what Paisley here is wearing, you know, if that was a little bit more orange, I would probably still consider that a brown in the medieval period because it's looks like a brownish color. So our perception of colors and the perception of colors in the medieval period are way different. And I think we look too literally because we don't have a word for it or we don't have proof of it. My question is then, when was it invented? If you can't...
When the orange was invented, it's not a natural fruit.
No, it is not. You're correct, actually. And that is actually where the word comes from, is from
It's a
the fruit.
genetically altered lemon.
Yep,
I know.
it is. So the word, yes, was invented, but the color has been around forever. Does anyone know what the earliest pigment found is?
Ochre. Ochre. No?
Pink. It is pink. They have found pink in fossil records that would be used as pink pigment. Pink was the very first color as far as like pigments and dyeing and stuff like that. Then it was ochre, yes. There is another, I forget what it's called. It starts with an R. It's a resin of some kind. But it also, the Egyptians would use it to create orange. Unfortunately, it creates a plume of arsenic. So I did not really feel like poisoning everybody here with arsenic gas, but that is also another way to create orange. The Egyptians would use it. What? No, it starts with an R. It's like a mineral. It's found near lead. If I had service, I would look it up. But there's a mineral that you can crush up like lapis, and it would make an orange color. And I know that once you put it, like once you're doing stuff, it's basically arsenic. So that's, yeah. I just don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. And since I didn't want to bring that here, I didn't do as much research on that. But that is something that they would use. Just like soda ash was originally found in ancient lake beds that the Egyptians would dig up. And then they, what?
Rhodium?
No, I'll find it out and it starts with like, it was a resin of some kind. I know that. It was a resin that they found when mining, and I know that that's where, yeah, it was, I didn't even know that. I thought that was very fascinating when I saw that.
Isn't there a Welsh word for that's not orange but
No, it's not
implies
Welsh.
what language was
I
it?
don't know what language it is, but I do know that there is a word. I can't remember if it was
It's
Italian
Gaelic,
or,
wasn't it?
Gaelic. I don't remember for sure.
Well,
Okay.
as we just heard in that song, she said, you know, the wheat gold hair,
Mm-hmm.
that is, you know, aged wheat or wheat,
Mhm.
ripened wheat is kind of an orangish color. So
I'm pretty sure the word was Gaelic. Do you remember what the word was? Okay,
I don't
but
remember
the
what
word
it was, but
we were,
there's a word,
she was sharing
it's
with me,
either-
yeah.
It's either Italian, German, or Gaelic. I can't remember which one it was, but it was on a live stream. I remember hearing it.
probably German.
Wasn't it red orange
Yeah,
or
it
red
was-
red yellow?
Yeah, like the root words were like red and yellow. The root and tail words were like red and yellow. I forget what it is, but train of thought is now fully gone.
Sorry.
Anyways,
Oh, you're fine.
There's no train in the medieval times.
What?
There's no train in medieval times.
You know, it's
the horse, the donkey has left the stable.
yeah, the donkey's gone.
Now, did anybody come through, like, say, Ireland or anywhere wearing the color orange?
Now, there's no, like, record of that, you know, per se. But, you know, in China, orange was obviously a very commonly used color because the Buddhists would use it, as I had said. And there is a lot of connections between China and Ireland. They're finding more every day. One of the big things that I like to use, that I was told, was Irish women, the reason that they used to wrap their hair when they were married is because of the Chinese. That was actually a Chinese thing that the Irish took and started using themselves. And actually up until like the 1960s, married women that were Irish would still wrap their hair. A lot of women had kind of chosen to stop doing it by then, but especially out like on the little islands and different areas, women would still wrap their hair. I don't have mine on because it'd be a pain in the butt and I didn't feel like putting it on today, but they would use their silk and things like that. So to think that they wouldn't, you know, transfer that on somehow. If they're connecting with each other and there's knowledge of them, I mean, they found Islamic coins in Dublin. So, I mean, if they're trading with, you know, the Middle East countries are definitely trading with China. The goods are going back and forth somehow. You know, even if there's not direct connection that you can claim until, I think it was the 1300s. I want to say it was the 1300s that the first Irishmen actually stepped foot in China. But if you look, there's knowledge of Buddhism and other things in Ireland as early as the 6th and 7th centuries. So clearly they were way more connected. And I mean, the Vikings came in, integrated with the Irish, and then opened that. All those trade maps where Ireland is excluded is so wrong. Ireland has been trading with people all over the world. I mean, the Viking Silk Road, I mean, the Vikings were opening them up. Like, to say that people weren't trading and weren't connected is just dumb, in my opinion.
So, you mentioned the amount of saffron.
Yes.
How much was it?
Almost 3. It was like 2.7 grams.
And how much saffron is that really?
Are you talking flowers?
Well, no, how many strands?
Strands. So each gram is roughly 150. So you're looking at 4 something strands, 400 and something strands.
No, again.
I'd have to do.
So that is why spice traders are so rich.
Mm-hmm.
Because, so when you harvest,
Yep. Oh yeah. When you harvest saffron, it is a very delicate process.
you only pull 2 strands.
Really? We grow saffron, and we've been doing research and looking, and not everyone does that.
Really?
I have seen a lot of different things, and everyone you pluck the flower.
Oh, so you should only pluck 2 strands. That way you leave one to pollinate the bulb so it divides.
Oh, see, and I've seen what people do is they don't pluck every single one. They'll pluck certain, like, they might do every other depending on, but that's a good idea. I'm going to have to try that with our stuff. That's a good idea. Which would then also cut your profit margin down significantly.
Do you grow them in totes?
No, we have a little special bed for them.
So if you grow them in totes, you can put the lid on it and just slide it underneath the deck when they're dormant so they're out of the way.
That's a good idea. We're wanting to eventually get to mass production, not mass production, but enough. I think we have right now, we have 180 bulbs. They're in their dormant phase right now. So we'll see if and when they come back.
So you use saffron that you raised then?
No, I did not. I did not have enough. No.
So the amount of saffron that you used for the experiment right now, about how much would the estimated cost at today's price?
Oh geez. Oh my gosh. Because there was multiple vats of saffron. So for this vat alone was almost 3. I want to say I probably used about 5 grams of saffron total. And are you wanting me to go off the high end price or
That's about $1,000 roughly.
Yeah.
Damn.
Today's prices.
If it's high end saffron. Now I didn't get the highest end saffron, but saffron can go for $72 a gram, depending on where it's from, what it is, and everything like that. So it is a very expensive spice, and the Irish were importing it by the boatloads because their Galloglass warriors and their Kern warriors wore saffron yellow. It is not very traditional for women to wear the saffron yellow. I did it so that I could show you guys how to do the dyeing process and things like that. But traditionally, women wouldn't wear the yellow. They would wear white. I'm trying to find reference to other colors. So far, I've only seen white undershirts. But for class purposes, I dyed my Lian yellow, as the Galloglass and Kern warriors would do. And their lians also were quite different than women's. Women's lians were a little more form-fitting. Theirs were the big, huge sleeves that were kind of, comes down to here. That was theirs. They would also wear shorter pants because, I don't know if you know anything about Ireland, but it's wet. Your clothes are dragging on the ground, and you've got like long flowy dresses that are dragging. It's gonna be ruined. You don't want your dress dragging on the ground in Ireland. I've been there. It's wet. It's not something you just want your.
Lies.
But the
Iceland
saffron.
is full of ice too.
What?
Iceland is full of ice too.
And Greenland
that's
is
really
green?
Fascinating you bring up Iceland. Iceland and Ireland have a very, very fun history. I've been learning. They're a lot more connected than people realize, because there's been a recent study where a bunch of Icelanders did their DNA tests, and they're Irish.
Stay on top of it.
I am, yeah. Thank you.
Yes, we can squirrel. Good distraction.
Yeah, OMG, thanks.
So where have you been getting all this information from?
So I found a couple different dye manuscripts. There's the Innsbruck manuscript. There's stock something manuscript. I couldn't necessarily find a recipe for yellow onions, but Fergus Kelly wrote a book called Early Irish Farming, and in there he states that yellow onions have been used as a dye a long time. I mean, early Irish farming, he's talking back in the Viking period. So if yellow onions have been used since then, you know, there's a recipe out there somewhere, but I could not find a recipe. I also could not find the exact recipe in which the Buddhist monks used. I don't know if that's just lack of me not knowing where to look, or if it's really that closely guarded of a secret, but I personally could not find an exact recipe to go from as far as with the yellow onions. It's a more modern recipe I kind of followed and took it on with a twist because they were using animal fibers with it. So what I did is I just went back to the drawing board and I looked through the Innsbruck manuscript and I started looking at different mordants and different things like to soak, like the soda ash and things like that. I started looking for those other things to kind of make my own recipe because I couldn't really find one with onions. It's a very short blip in the book that says yellow onions have been used, and all I could really find was on wool. There's a group, I want to say in Norway, I might be wrong on this, but they are a Viking village and they use all kinds of things, and but they do it on wool. So I was kind of using them as a guideline as well, but animal fibers and plant fibers are completely 100% different. So I kind of had to change my tactics a little bit. So this is kind of my own recipe using what would have been available to people back then. It's not necessarily quoted, but everything is what would have been used. So it is period. But do you have any other questions, Andrea? Yes.
On saffron, the subject of saffron,
Yes.
I have found it at Ross and other places.
You want to be
such
really
as
careful.
that.
You want to be very careful, especially if it's ground up saffron. Don't trust that because it's probably turmeric. A lot of people.
Was the fronds.
It is the fronds. Okay, so yeah, as long as it's the fronds, it's, you know, if you find it at Ross, it might be like really low grade saffron. But one thing when you're looking for saffron, a lot of the times what people have been doing recently is grinding up turmeric and grinding up saffron, putting more turmeric in it and just a wee bit of saffron and hiking the price. So I don't personally trust ground up saffron. I recommend you don't buy that because more than likely it is not saffron. Unless you know the person who's doing it in a reputable, I would just go for the strands. The cheaper it is, the less potent it is more than likely, but it still gives you, you know, it's great for depression. Saffron has a lot of benefits to it in general. So, I mean, I was drinking saffron tea every night and I was sleeping like a baby. So, I mean, there's so many uses for it in general other than just for dyeing purposes, but I would recommend, especially if you're dyeing, the more expensive probably is going to be better. And I hate saying that because I'm very anti buy the expensive stuff. But in this case, buy the expensive stuff. It's probably actually saffron. Let's see if this guy's heated up yet. So this has only been in here for a few minutes. But I kind of want to give you guys a look on how it kind of starts turning. It does start turning fairly quickly. Now saffron, it kind of takes a little bit longer. Just because it is yellow, and I've been realizing that for some reason yellow is just not a fun color to work with always, unless you add turmeric. But I did put apple cider vinegar in this vat as well. Like I said, I found it to be really help bind it. Yes.
So through this entire process, was there anything you found that didn't work?
Yes. Yes. Don't use cream of tartar with onions. And I don't know if I did it wrong, but don't do it because it did not do anything. It basically, the fabric just came back like this. I was like, that's wonderful. So I found that didn't seem to work as well, at least for the onion skins. I did not try it with the saffron because the saffron is expensive and I wanted to get that down and leave it. So I did experiment with cream of tartar and onions. I don't know if I did it wrong. I don't know, you know, it's all chemistry, learning, you know, that kind of a thing. So I don't know if I did something wrong, but I found that did not work. It did not like it. And not using alum, also, like, if I didn't use the alum with it, it didn't adhere as well either. It still kind of stayed a very yellowy color instead of adhering properly.
So I understand that your primary focus this time was orange and yellow. Have you tried other colors?
I have not. Partially because I would like to get my hands on some madder root. That is the next thing I would like to do, and indigo, and I just don't have a source for that right now. I've talked to my local holistic shop, and they're ordering in a few things for me that they're able to get their hands on, but I am very distrustful of buying things online. I try really hard not to buy anything online because you never know if that's actually what you're getting, and I've been scammed so many times buying things. I have to find a reputable source for the rest of them. I really want to try, I have a bunch of like big chunks of lapis. I kind of want to crush a bunch of those up and try that next. That's kind of my next goal is blue. But
I've seen that work so well.
yeah, I've seen some gorgeous blues from doing that. So that is my next goal. But as far as like plants and things like that, I am very particular when I buy things just because I want to make sure it's actually what I'm purchasing. And I'm not getting a bag of madder root that's just grass that somebody put in there.
So I understand that you said this is all cellulose based, so you're talking like cotton and stuff
Yes.
like that. What would you do different with, say, wool?
Wool is a completely different process. So wool, it could requires complete. You would not soak it in soda ash. First of all, there's a couple different things. I want to say it was like soap paste or something like that, if I'm remembering the word properly. That you would kind of soak it in. The other thing is you do not just put wool into a hot pot. It will completely ruin the wool. Be unusable.
Felt ball.
What?
Felt ball.
Basically, yes. So you have to, with wool and plant, you know, in animal fibers, you start it in a cool pot. You put it in there, and you slowly add hotter water. And you take away water. You add water until it's the right temperature. Wool is very complicated to work with, and I have wool that we sheared from our goat that I'm really wanting to try it on, but I don't want to ruin it. So I want to make sure that I know that process a little bit better because it is fairly complicated, and I don't want to ruin the animal hair. So it is quite a bit different, and it requires a lot more time. As where this, I can just put it in the pot and kind of leave it. People say you should stir it. I haven't really found much. Part of the reason this is splotchy is because I had the onion skins in with it when I dyed it, which will give you kind of a blotchy look to it, which I kind of like, and so I was like, oh, we're gonna make it look kind of fun. But as far as using, like if I were to use animal in this, I also, certain mordants will ruin the animal fibers. So you have to completely change everything that you're doing when working with animal fibers. But I have not experimented with it as much with that, just because I don't want to ruin my wool.
So, another follow-up question then.
Yes.
How would a dyeing process work with, like, say, leather?
That I'm unsure. That I don't know very much on. That we have a guy in our group who does a lot of leather working, and he is going to start working on the leather aspect side of it because I don't work with leather at all. I'm not familiar with it, so he is really excited to start trying to do that with some of my dye vats. Now that once the class is over, I'm going to kind of give them to him and he can have fun with them, so that he can kind of experiment because leather is not my forte. I will fully admit that. But
That's fair.
yeah, it is a different process as well. I want to say it'd probably be a very similar process with wool. You wouldn't want to use certain things. I would assume you don't want to just put leather directly into a hot pot because I'm assuming it will probably do something similar. I know if you soak them in cold, like soak boots in cold water, you wear them around for a while, it'll kind of fit to your feet. But leather is just not something I'm very familiar with.
You have to use lye to pre-treat leather
Okay.
before it'll soak up the dyes.
I'm just seeing what she knows.
Leather's just not my forte, so I'm like, here, Brandon, you can have this. It's yours as soon as I'm done. But any other?
No.
Okay. So I'm gonna just kind of do this one a little early because it is kind of getting the color that I wanted. And it will lighten up. That is the other thing. So while it looks extremely dark right now, it will lighten up a little bit. But even just after 20 minutes or so. And like I said, would this technically have probably been classified as a yellow in the medieval period? Absolutely. Is it a yellow as far as our current standards? It's bordering it. I would say it is definitely more orange than yellow in this case, especially with the other one that I had previously dyed. Now as far as the saffron, I'm going to grab different gloves just because I don't feel like mixing dyes. Obviously, also, the more times you give it a bath, the brighter and more vibrant the color is going to be. But also, you know, our version of what we think of as colors probably weren't nearly as vibrant back then either. You know, neons did not exist, really. I mean, you can get a pretty vibrant orange and yellow and blue and purple, but it would not be a neon color. Just a second, I put my gloves on. Process. Sweaty hands. Wow, this is harder than I thought it was. Stop it. Gotta be smarter than the glove. I would definitely do this for at least one more bath, in my own opinion, just to kind of give it a more vibrant color. But just as a basis, you can definitely see it starting to adhere. Like I said, I prefer 2 baths at minimum. Just gives you a good base color. If you want to change it or do something else after that, good base color. Train of thought just left again. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
Mom brain. Does anyone have any questions? No?
Can you make any color, or is it just the primary?
Well, I mean, you can really make any color. I mean, if the Vikings were walking around wearing pink, I mean, you can really make anything. I mean, there are certain shells that you can crush up and they'll turn purple. As I've said, lapis does blue. Indigo is a flower, if I'm remembering properly, that it does that beautiful indigo blue. There's a lot of different things. Hawthorn bark, which I have not tested this because I don't have a hawthorn tree or access to one. Yeah, I know, Marcy, I was like, but apparently, supposedly, that also turns orange. Now, one thing I was able to confirm, unfortunately I did not test dye with this because I'm not sure what I did wrong in this process, but lilac bark will also turn a dyebat orange. Very beautiful orange. It says you're supposed to soak it for 3 to 7 days. I soaked it for 4 and it was moldy. So I'm not sure what I did wrong in that process. I still have to kind of figure that out. But in order to get all of the color out of the bark, you should have it for about a week. I'm going to retry that. I just am going to do a little bit more research on how to deal with that because I didn't see anything about it molding. And I did everything that the steps had told me to with it, so I'm not entirely sure what went wrong in the process there. Yes?
Typically from start to finish, how long does it take to have a wearable garment?
Oh, God.
Or at least functionally usable fabric?
Functionally usable fabric. It takes me about a day to make the vat itself because you want to let it soak. You want to make as much as you can out of it before you don't want to cook the thing. So like, for example, you want to have it up with some heat. You do not want it to boil, and you do not want to just cook the onion skins or whatever you're using. You don't want it to just bake in there. So you want it to sit and simmer, and then you turn the heat off and let it kind of steep. I found 24 hours was best to get, at minimum, to get the color out. And then after that, I found taking the garment, soaking it in it while it's doing its pre-boil for about an hour, and then I let it sit overnight, or 8 hours, depending on when you're doing it. till it's fully cool and room temperature. Pulling it out, bringing it out, starting it again. Let it dry a tiny bit. You don't want it to be super, super wet, so give it a little bit time to dry. But I found that when it's damp, it adheres best. So you just take it out, let it dry off a little bit, put it back in the vat, same thing. I want to say I did, it's like 2 days. 2 days at minimum. And that's if, you know, everything is going the way you want it to. I mean, I had a brain aneurysm with this because it was really yellow. Realized I forgot to put apple cider vinegar in it when I refilled the vat and did it. So, you know, put the apple cider vinegar in it, started doing what I wanted it to. So if you mess up or something like that, that can set you back even further. But I would say at minimum 2 days of dyeing, getting the vat ready. You know, if you're only doing one bath, you know, that cuts time down. But the more baths you do, it could be anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks, depending on the color that you're trying to get. And especially with the yellow, I highly suggest doing more than one bath. And I would even say more than 2 sometimes, because it will enhance it more. So 2 days, you know, 2 weeks, kind of varies depending on the color as well. Does anyone have any other thoughts, comments, questions? Well, then that's it for the dyeing. So thank you guys. I hope you learned something.
Now how about the resurrection?
What?
Now how about the resurrection?
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna have to work on that one. I didn't prepare anything for that one.
Good recovery.
Okay, you can stop recording it now.